Hey gang, so this is going to be a relatively quick video on Zrememsher versus Dynamesh, right? So here is a Zremeshed piece of geometry with all the pieces put together, right? Now, I'm going to duplicate this, keep a copy around, and now Zremesh, Dynamesh, and projection are all kind of integral pieces to my workflow, right? So we've seen how I block this character out just with a series of balls to start, and then curve tubes, or simple cylinders, something like that to start out all the pieces. For the fingers, just starting with Z-spheres. So just trying to cover a variety of ways to think about mesh generation, really, to show you guys. There's a number of other ways that you could think about doing it. So let's say this character was Dynameshed. So I'll Dynamesh him at the default 128. Right, it's going to take a second. And the first thing that you notice about Dynamesh and the way Dynamesh works is that in the front we get almost an even grid, right? And you can see where the contour and profile, right? So here we've got the pectoral all as one grid, and then here we start to see all these little triangular junctions, right? And it's where the shape starts to curve back, right? So if you imagine a blanket and you're tossing a blanket on the model, from the front, every place that's poking out the most, you're going to end up with an even grid. Where things start to kind of curl back a little bit, another grid, another blanket from the side is being projected, and where we see those little junctions are where those two grids run into one another, right? So you usually see them at the high point of a form, or where a form is kind of floating back. But either way, this model is very dense and kind of hard to work with. So what I would like to do is, let's just take the hands, right? And I'm going to use mask lasso. So control and click in the brush menu and get mask lasso. Oh. And I'm going to hold control, drag just around that thumb, and control alt to remove the leg. I think I got part of the leg. Alright, cool. So now we should have a clean mask. I can hit Control W and I can see that I have two separate polygroups, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say split, group split. And that's going to give me two different subtools, right? And this is the way that I start the model. I'm actually going back and showing you can break models apart just as easily as you can, put models together. So now I've got one subtool. The top subtool is the body without the hands. I'm going to re-Dynamesh that. It's going to close that up. The second subtool is going to be the hands without the body. Re-Dynamesh that, close that up. So now we can kind of see, if I go here, I have that, and if I go here, I have that, right? So now, what to do when we have two separate models like this? And you know what? Let's take the head, and let's cut the head off too. So again, Control W, when I look, it's got its own polygroup. And I'm going to say group split again. And I'm going to take the head. Another thing, when you reorder your subtools, usually for a character I like the head to be at the top, torso to be second, etc. So I'm just going to, just for my own housekeeping, so I'm going to take the head here, and I'm going to hit this little up and to the side arrow right there. And that's going to take the head and scoop it up top there, right? So now I've got the head, the body, and the hands. So now I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, you know what? I want the body and the hands to be together. So let's go ahead and take that. I'm going to grab the body and say merge down because the hands are below it. And now we've merged them together. Right? So the thing I don't want people to get confused about is they go, why did you cut off the hands if you're just going to put them back together? I don't understand. I'm only cutting off the hands to have a piece to show you how to connect using Dynamesh. That's the only reason I cut the hands off, right? So I hope that that's clear for everybody. I'm not cutting them off for any procedural reason. You could, in theory, cut them off to make a new tool that you want to reuse later on, or an insert multi-mesh brush or something like that. But For right now, I only cut them off because when I'm generating pieces, I usually add things, and I just needed to have an example where I'm showing how to add two things back together, right? So I've added the arms and the hands and back together, bodies in there as well, and now I'm going to go ahead and Dynamesh these. And again, the thing that Dynamesh is good at is closing up those seams. So now this is all one piece again, and if I hold down Shift, let me make sure Z add is turned on. If I hold down Shift, I can get rid of that little seam right in there, right? So now they're all one piece. But again, the model's really dense, right? So now's where Zremesher would come in. But before I do that, I'm going to take the head. I'm going to add the head back in. So I'm going to say merge down, because the head is on top of the body. And then just Dynamesh again. That Dynameshes them both together. And again, I can smooth out that seam. Just hold down Shift. And there you go. So again, really dense mesh. Don't want to really have to deal with this density. So what I'll normally do is I'll normally duplicate the model. We already have a duplicate here, right? So I don't need to duplicate this model. But usually I'll duplicate the model just so I have something to use as a snap guide. In fact, let's just do it. Let's delete the old one. And now I'm going to duplicate this model. This is just going to be something that I can snap to, right? Or project to. Now I'm going to go back here. And I'm going to say Zremesher. And I'm going to hit Shift F. I'm going to say Zremesher. And I'm going to set the target polygons to, let's say, 6,000, right? So just 6. Now I'm going to hit Zremesher. It's going to take a moment. And the result that you get from Zremesher is actually evaluating the curvature of the model. So areas where we can have a deep crevice, you know, like under the pecs or whatever, should influence that you have geometry running along those little crevices. So now we can see that we get geometry that's evenly spaced quads, and you're going to end up with a shape that follows what you want. So you go, well, hot dog, this is pretty good, right? But if we look, there's some areas where we lost a little density in the feet. You know, we can always resculpt those little toes out and whatever, so that may or may not be a big deal. But you just have to be careful. Now, if I don't want to have to resculpt anything, this is where projection comes into play, because I can turn back on the other model, just go down here to project in the subtool menu, and I'm going to say project all. And it's going to say, hey, this has poly painting. I'll say no right now, because I just flooded the object with white. That's in the next video. So I'm going to hit Control D, and I'm going to say project all. Again, nope, no poly paint. And then Control D again, so I'm at 154,000 polygons. Project all, no. And you can keep dividing and projecting, and I'm going to hide the old model. Now I've got everything, including the toes that I sculpted in, whatever, but I also have the advantage of having good sculptable topology. Again, this topology that you get from Zremesher is usually for film not good enough to give you all the deformation that you want, especially in areas like the face, right? There's a lot of areas like the chest and the back and stuff that actually look like they could work pretty well, you know, but the face in particular won't do what I want it to do. And then there's little things in the crotch and over here in the butt that I definitely would change a little bit. But overall, Zremesher does a pretty good job, you know, so gives me a good sculptable topology with the density where I need it, where I want it for the sculpt. And that's pretty much how I try to think about it. So I work in pieces for as long as I can to keep things modular. Then I Dynamesh those pieces together, and when I have all the pieces Dynameshed together and represented well, then I go ahead and create a Zremeshed version of it, so that I have good resolution for like different levels, so I can sculpt big changes at low levels, right, where it's really fast, and I can get a lot of fine detail at high levels. So that's really the way that I try to think about this stuff. So that's kind of my technique for this. I hope it makes sense.